A young man, on the day he turned 18, was kicked out by his stepmother. She said he'd inherited a worthless, broken-down repair shop. What he found inside wasn't just about fixing old electronics, it was about fixing his own future. And if you've ever felt like the world has handed you a broken inheritance, a situation that felt hopeless, I want you to hit that subscribe button. Because these are the stories we tell here, not about easy victories, but about finding the tools to rebuild when everything has fallen apart. The cardboard box wasn't even taped shut. It sat on the polished oak of the dining room table, an ugly, brown island in the sea of my stepmother's curated good taste. It was the only thing in the room that felt like it belonged to me. Sharon slid it toward me with two perfectly manicured fingers, as if touching it might infect her with poverty. The sound it made, a dry scrape against the wood, was the sound of an ending. "Happy birthday, Leo," she said. Her voice had the same temperature as the chilled water in the glass at her elbow. It was a voice I'd been hearing for 10 years, ever since my father had decided his life needed a second act, and that this woman, with her sharp angles and sharper ambition, was his leading lady. After he died 6 months ago, the voice had lost its thin veneer of warmth. Now, it was just business. "Inside," she continued, gesturing vaguely at the box, "is your inheritance. The deed to your grandfather's old shop in Havenwood, the keys, and whatever other sentimental junk your father kept. It's yours. As of today, you're a legal adult, a property owner." There was a cruelty in the way she said, "property owner," a little twist of the lips that suggested it was a joke, and I was the punchline. I looked from her face, a mask of detached finality, to the box. I didn't move. My hands were resting on my knees, and I could feel the tremor in them. 18 years old. I was supposed to feel free. I felt like a ship being cut from its moorings in the middle of a storm. "My clothes?" I asked. My voice was a croak. "Packed. 2 duffel bags by the door," she said, taking a sip of water. "I took the liberty. I've also called a cab for you. It will take you to the bus station. There's a bus to Havenwood at 4. It was 2:30. I stared at her, trying to find a flicker of the woman my father had loved, or at least claimed to. The woman who made him laugh. All I saw was a stranger who had shared my house, a person for whom my existence was now an inconvenience to be tidied away. The grief for my dad, a raw and constant ache for the last 6 months, sharpened into something else, a cold, quiet anger. "The shop is worthless, Leo," she added, as if offering a piece of helpful advice. "The roof leaks, the whole block is slated for redevelopment. The offer from the consortium is still on the table. It's not much, but it's more than you have. My lawyer's card is in there. When you're ready to sign your share over, call him. He'll wire you the money." My share. The words hung in the air. So that's what this was. An eviction and a business proposition, all wrapped up in a birthday bow. I finally reached for the box. The cardboard was soft, worn. It smelled like the back of my father's closet, of cedar and old paper and a faint hint of his aftershave. A smell that broke my heart. I stood up. My legs felt unsteady. I didn't look at her again. I walked to the front door where 2 black duffel bags sat obediently, like dogs waiting for a command. I hoisted one over my shoulder, grabbed the other in one hand, and tucked the box under my arm. It was awkward. I was clumsy with the burden of my own life. The front door clicked shut behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't have the energy for that kind of theater. I just closed it, leaving the world of polished oak and chilled water behind. The cab was already there, a silent black car humming at the curb. The driver didn't get out. He just watched me in the rearview mirror as I fumbled my belongings into the back seat and slid in after them. "Bus station," I said. The box sat on my lap, my new home, my inheritance. A worthless repair shop in a town I hadn't seen since I was a child. Sharon was wrong about one thing, though. It wasn't more than I had. At that moment, it was all I had. The bus ride was 3 hours of watching the world dissolve. The neat, manicured suburbs of the city bled into sprawling commercial parks, which then gave way to tired-looking towns with boarded-up storefronts and faded flags. The highway unspooled, a gray ribbon tying together places people were either fleeing or stuck in. I watched the progression through the grimy window, my own reflection a ghostly passenger staring back. My face was thin, my eyes shadowed. I looked like a stranger to myself. The bus was mostly empty. An old woman knitting, her needles clicking a soft, metallic rhythm. A young mother with a restless toddler who kept dropping a worn teddy bear into the aisle. Each time, I'd lean over, pick it up, and hand it back. The mother would give me a small, exhausted smile. We didn't speak. There was a shared understanding on that bus, a sense of transit, of being between one life and another. We were all just trying to get somewhere. I kept the box on the seat beside me, my hand resting on it. I hadn't opened it yet. I was afraid to. Afraid of what was inside and what wasn't. Afraid that Sharon was right, that it was just sentimental junk, a final, sad testament to a life that had ended. My grandfather, Arthur, I barely remembered him. He died when I was 12. He was my mother's father, a quiet, stooped man who always smelled of solder and coffee. He had gentle hands, the fingers stained with something dark, but they were always steady. He'd shown me how to take apart a radio once, laying all the tiny components on a felt cloth, naming each one in his low, rumbling voice. Capacitors, resistors, transistors. To me, they were just magic. My mother had loved him fiercely. After she died, my father tried to maintain the connection, driving us out to Havenwood for holidays. But the visits grew shorter, more strained. Dad had a new life, a new wife. Arthur was a relic of the old one. He was a quiet man, and my father was not. They had little to say to each other. I remember Arthur watching my father and Sharon with a look I couldn't decipher then. Now, I suspected it was assessment. A quiet, steady taking of measure. The last time I saw him, he'd pressed a small, smooth stone into my palm. "Everything has a current, Leo," he'd said. "You just have to learn how to feel it." I'd kept that stone in my pocket for a year before losing it. Now, sitting on this bus, I would have given anything to have it back. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the fields. The sky was a bruised purple and orange. The bus rumbled on, a mechanical heartbeat in the growing twilight. I thought about the offer Sharon had mentioned. The consortium. The money. It was a tempting thought. A few $1,000s. Enough to get a room somewhere, to disappear, to not have to deal with a leaky roof and a box of junk. It was the easy path. Just sign a paper, take the wire transfer, and walk away. Erase this last, tenuous link to my past. But something held me back. A stubborn, foolish flicker of loyalty to a man I barely knew. He had tried to show me something once, about the secret life inside a dead machine. Maybe he'd left something else for me to find. Or maybe I was just a kid, romanticizing a box of trash because it was all I had left. The bus hissed to a stop, the air brakes sighing like a tired old man. "Havenwood," the driver called out, his voice flat. I looked out the window. It wasn't a station, just a covered bench on the side of a 2-lane road, next to a gas station whose sign was missing half its letters. The lights of the gas station cast a sickly yellow glow on the wet pavement. It had started to rain, a cold, miserable drizzle. I grabbed my bags and the box. The young mother gave me another one of her tired smiles as I passed. "Good luck," she whispered. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me all day. "You too," I managed. Stepping off the bus was like stepping into another time. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. The silence was profound, broken only by the hum of the gas station's cooler and the patter of the rain. The bus pulled away, its red taillights shrinking into the darkness until they were gone. I was alone. I stood under the flimsy shelter of the bus stop, the rain misting my face. I had a piece of paper in my pocket, an address I'd scribbled down. 14 Church Street. I had no idea where that was. I walked over to the gas station. An old man sat behind the counter, reading a newspaper spread out before him. The bell above the door jingled weakly. He looked up over his glasses. "Help you?" "I'm looking for 14 Church Street," I said, my voice feeling too loud in the quiet store. He squinted at me, his eyes traveling over my city clothes, my duffel bags. "You must be Arthur's boy," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, surprised. "His grandson, Leo." "Heard you were coming," he said, folding his newspaper with slow, deliberate movements. "Heard your stepmother finally made her move. I'm Bill. Knew your granddad for 40 years. He pointed a thick finger out the door. "Church Street is 2 blocks down. Hang a left. You can't miss the shop. It's the saddest looking one on the block." He paused. "Sorry for your trouble, son. Your father. And all this." His sympathy felt genuine, not pitying. It was a simple statement of fact. "Thanks," I said. "Place has been shut up for years. Power's off. You'll need a flashlight." He reached under the counter and pulled out a heavy, black metal flashlight. "Here, take it. Pay me back when you can." I took it. The weight was solid, reassuring in my hand. "Thank you, I will." He just nodded. Arthur was a good man. Meticulous. Don't believe everything you hear about what's worthless. That last sentence followed me out into the rain. I walked down the empty street, the flashlight beam cutting a shaky circle on the wet sidewalk. The town was dark. Most of the houses had their lights off. It felt like a place that went to sleep early. I turned onto Church Street. It was a row of old brick storefronts, most of them dark and empty. For lease signs were plastered in the windows, faded and peeling. And then I saw it. Number 14. Bill was right. It was the saddest looking one. The large plate glass window in the front was covered in a thick layer of grime, so opaque it was almost black. The green paint on the doorframe was peeling in long, curling strips. Above the window, a faded sign read, "Arthur's Radio and Repair. If it has a current, we can fix it." The promise felt like a ghost. This place didn't look like it could fix anything. It looked broken itself, beyond repair. My inheritance. I stood there in the rain, the flashlight beam trembling on the peeling paint, and a wave of absolute despair washed over me. This wasn't a home. It was a tomb. The key was old-fashioned, made of brass, heavy in my palm. It slid into the lock with a grating sound, like metal screaming in protest. I had to put my shoulder into the door to get it to open. It swung inward with a groan, releasing a gust of air that was so thick with the smell of dust, decay, and something faintly metallic, like old pennies and ozone, that I actually took a step back. It was the smell of time itself. I swept the flashlight beam across the room. It was bigger than I expected, and more chaotic. Workbenches lined 2 of the walls, buried under mountains of electronic carcasses. Old televisions with bulbous screens stared out like blind eyes. The guts of radios and record players were spilled across the surfaces, a tangle of wires and tubes like mechanical viscera. Shelves reached to the high, pressed tin ceiling, crammed with cardboard boxes, some of which had burst open, spilling components onto the floor. Dust lay over everything like a fine gray snow, so thick it softened all the edges, making the room look like a photograph from a forgotten era. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on something. I pointed the light down. The floor was covered in a thin layer of fallen plaster from the ceiling, which was stained with dark, sprawling watermarks. Sharon was right. The roof leaked. I walked deeper into the shop, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness, revealing one scene of decay after another. A stack of vinyl records, their covers warped and mildewed. A high-end oscilloscope from the 70s, its screen cracked. It was an elephant's graveyard of technology. For a moment, all I felt was the crushing weight of it all. This wasn't a project, it was an archaeological dig. I was supposed to find a future in here? It felt like I'd been buried. I made my way to the back of the shop, past a workbench that held a single, half-disassembled television, the tools laid out beside it neatly, as if my grandfather had just stepped away for a coffee and never came back. It was the only orderly thing in the entire room. Behind the counter, there was a door. I pushed it open and found a small, cramped room. It was a combination office and living space. There was a narrow cot against one wall, a small desk piled with schematics and technical manuals, and a hot plate next to a tiny, rust-stained sink. A single, grimy window looked out onto a dark, overgrown alley. This was where he'd lived, or at least where he'd spent most of his time. The air in here was even more stale, but it also held a faint, lingering scent of coffee. On the desk, right in the center, was a small, square metal box, the kind people used for petty cash. It was locked. Taped to the top of it was a plain white envelope. My name, Leo, was written on it in a precise architectural script. My grandfather's handwriting. My heart started to beat a little faster. This was it. This was something deliberate. I set my duffel bag down, the flashlight beam shaking in my hand. I carefully peeled the envelope from the box. The paper was dry, brittle. I slid my finger under the flap and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of folded paper. I unfolded it. The letter began without preamble. Leo, if you are reading this, then several things I feared have come to pass. Your father is gone, and his wife has shown her true nature. I am sorry. I am sorry for your loss, and I am sorry that I am not there to help you through it. I had to sit down. I sank onto the edge of the cot, the springs groaning in protest. The dust puffed up around me. I read the line again. He had known. Somehow this quiet old man had seen the future, had looked at Sharon and seen this exact moment years down the line. She will have told you this place is worthless, the letter continued. In a financial sense, she is not entirely wrong. As a piece of real estate, its value is in the land, not the building. A development group, the Horizon Consortium, wants this entire block. They have been trying for a decade. They are patient. They are also not good people. They made your father an offer before he passed. He refused. Now they will be pressuring his widow, and she will be pressuring you. It was all there, exactly as it had happened. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the damp air. It was the strange, unnerving feeling of having your life laid out in a script written by a dead man. This shop is your inheritance, but not in the way you think. It is not a burden, it is a shield. And perhaps, if you are as much like your mother as I think you are, it can also be a key. But we will get to that. First, you need to survive. You are 18 and alone, and sentiment does not pay for food. The key to this cash box is in the place I taught you about currents. Look inside the old Majestic radio on the main bench, the one I was working on. Behind the main tuning capacitor. Be careful, it's delicate. The Majestic radio, the one with the tools laid out beside it. I stood up, my mind racing. A shield, a key. What did it mean? I went back into the main shop, my light finding the workbench. There it was, the big wooden console radio, its back panel removed. I peered inside, into the intricate forest of wires and vacuum tubes. I didn't know what a tuning capacitor was, but there was one large, finned metal component near the front. I reached in carefully, my fingers brushing against dusty glass tubes. And there, tucked behind the metal fins, was a small, silver key tied with a piece of string. I pulled it out, my hand trembling. I went back to the office and inserted the key into the lock on the metal box. It turned with a satisfying click. I lifted the lid. Inside, there were stacks of cash. $20 bills held together with rubber bands that had gone brittle with age. I thumbed through one stack. It had to be a few $1,000s. Enough to live on for months. Enough to follow Sharon's advice to just disappear. Beneath the cash was another envelope, thicker than the first. It was also addressed to me. I picked it up. My grandfather's voice from the first letter echoed in my head. A shield. He had left me this money not as a payout, but as a way to stay. To give me time. To give me a choice that wasn't born of desperation. For the first time since my father died, I felt something other than grief or fear. It was a fragile, tentative shoot of hope. This wasn't just a worthless shop. It was a place of secrets. And my grandfather, the quiet man who fixed radios, had left me a map. The decision of what to do next felt immense. I sat there on that dusty cot for what must have been an hour, the cash box open on my lap, the second, thicker envelope lying on top of the money. The air was cold and still. The only sound was the distant, rhythmic dripping of water somewhere in the cavernous main room, a steady, patient reminder of the decay that surrounded me. One path was so simple, so clear. Take the money. It was more cash than I'd ever had in my life. I could walk out of Havenwood in the morning, get on another bus, and go anywhere. Find a cheap apartment in a city where no one knew me. Get a job. Start over, completely and utterly, with no ties to the past. No leaky roof, no battle with a faceless development company, no stepmother's lawyer to deal with. Just clean, simple freedom. The freedom of anonymity. It was what any rational person would do. But then there was the other path, the one my grandfather's letter hinted at. The one that started with staying right here, in this crumbling, dusty tomb. The path that involved a fight I didn't understand against people I didn't know. It was the harder path, the uncertain path. It felt heavy, freighted with the expectations of a dead man. What did he mean? A shield? A key? Was I really like my mother? I barely remembered her. I had her photograph, a smiling woman with kind eyes, but she was more of a story than a person to me now. I thought about my father. He had refused their offer. He had chosen to hold on to this place even when it made no practical sense. Why? Was it for me? Or was it his own last, stubborn connection to the woman he'd lost and the father-in-law he never quite understood? I'd never know. He was gone, and he'd taken those answers with him. This is the kind of moment that defines you, isn't it? When you're standing at a crossroads and you have no map, no guide, just a choice between the easy wrong and the harder right. Or maybe it's not even about right and wrong. Maybe it's about choosing who you want to become. Do you want to be the person who runs or the person who stays? If you've ever faced a choice like that, a moment where your future splits into two very different roads, I want you to let me know in the comments. What did you choose? And why? There's so much strength in sharing these stories, in knowing that we're not the first to stand in that uncertain place. Your story matters. I picked up the second envelope. It was heavy. It felt like it was full of more than just paper. I decided, right then, that I couldn't make a choice until I knew what was inside. Running away felt like leaving a book half read. I had to know how the chapter ended. I opened the envelope. Inside were several folded documents and another multi-page letter. I unfolded the letter first, my hands still grimy with the dust of the shop. Leo, it began again in that same steady script. If you have chosen to open this, it means you have not run. Good. That is your mother in you. She never backed down from a challenge, especially when it was disguised as an inconvenience. Now for the truth. It is more complicated than just a greedy corporation. The Horizon Consortium is a subsidiary of a much larger entity, a real estate investment trust out of the city. They specialize in acquiring entire blocks in depressed areas like this one, using a combination of legal pressure, financial incentives, and intimidation. They buy out the desperate, then squeeze the holdouts. I have been a holdout for 15 years. The reason they want this land so badly is not just for redevelopment. The old railway line runs directly behind this block. They have an inside track, no pun intended, on a new regional transit plan. If it goes through, this worthless land will be worth 100 times what they are offering. They are not buying property. They are buying a future. Your future. Sharon knows this. Maybe not the full extent, but she knows the offer she's pushing you to accept is a fraction of the land's potential worth. She wants a quick, clean payout. She wants to sever the last tie to your father's old life, and you are that tie. Giving you this deed was not a kindness. It was a strategy. By making you a co-owner, she forces you into the negotiation. She assumes you, a broke 18-year-old, will be the easiest person in the world to convince. She assumes you will take the first offer made to you. Your signature is what she needs to unlock her own payday. I stopped reading, my head spinning. The cold anger from that morning returned, but this time it was a sharp, focused point. The sheer, calculated cynicism of it all. She hadn't just kicked me out. She had tried to use me as a pawn in her own greedy game. She'd handed me what she thought was a losing hand, expecting me to fold immediately. I continued reading. You cannot fight them on their terms. They have more money and more lawyers than God. But they have a weakness. They are impatient, and they have cut corners. I am, or was, a repairman. I don't just fix electronics, I look for the flaw, the weak point, the broken connection. For the last decade, I have been collecting things. You will find a file cabinet in the corner of this office, behind the stack of old schematics. It is locked. The key is taped to the underside of the desk drawer. Inside that cabinet is my research, correspondence, records of their lowball offers to your neighbors, affidavits from people they intimidated, a history of their code violations on other projects. It is not enough to stop them in a courtroom, perhaps, but it is enough to cause them a great deal of trouble, enough to make them negotiate in good faith, or enough to make them angry. You must be careful. With this letter, you will find the business card of a woman named Evelyn Albright. She is a lawyer here in town. Her office is small, but she is sharp, and more importantly, she is honest. She was my lawyer. I have left instructions with her and a retainer for her services to be made available to you. Go to her. Show her this letter. Do not talk to your stepmother's lawyer. Do not talk to anyone from Horizon. Talk only to Ms. Albright. She holds the rest of the pieces. This is your shield, Leo. The money gives you time. The information gives you leverage. The law, if you use it correctly, gives you protection. One final thing. This shop. It looks like a wreck. It is a wreck. But it is also a legacy. I built it from nothing. Your mother took her first steps on this floor. It is more than wood and brick. Do not let them take it from you for nothing. Arthur. I slowly folded the letter. My hands were steady now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He had left me a fortress, a crumbling, dusty, leaking fortress, but a fortress nonetheless. He had armed me, the money, the information, the lawyer. He hadn't just left me an inheritance, he had left me a battle plan. The choice was no longer a choice. Running felt like a betrayal of my father, who had refused the offer, a betrayal of my mother, the woman who never backed down, and a betrayal of this quiet, meticulous old man who had spent the last years of his life preparing for a fight he knew he wouldn't be there to see. I stood up and walked over to the desk. I ran my hand along the underside of the drawer, and my fingers brushed against a piece of tape. I peeled it off. A small, brass key fell into my palm. I looked at the file cabinet, buried behind a teetering stack of technical journals. My grandfather didn't just fix things, he looked for the flaw. And he had just shown me the flaw in Sharon's perfect little plan. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to the bus station. I was going to see a lawyer. The game had changed. The night in the shop was long and cold. I didn't sleep on the cot. It was a landscape of dust and mildew that I wasn't brave enough to explore yet. Instead, I cleared a space on the floor of the small office, using one of my duffel bags as a pillow. I kept the heavy flashlight beside me, its beam a comforting, if lonely, companion. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind rattling the grimy window pane sounded amplified in the profound silence. This wasn't just a quiet building. It was the absence of sound, the absence of life. Yet I didn't feel scared. I felt watchful, like a sentry on his first night at a new post. I woke with the first gray light of dawn filtering through the dirty glass. My back ached, and a fine layer of dust coated my clothes and face. I felt gritty, tired, but strangely clear-headed. The despair of the previous day had been burned away by the revelations in my grandfather's letters. I had a purpose. It was a daunting one, but it was better than the formless void of yesterday. I used some of the cash from the box to buy breakfast at a small diner down the street. It was called the Corner Booth, and it seemed to be the social hub of Havenwood. A few old-timers sat at the counter, nursing coffees and talking in low tones. They all looked up when I came in, the same assessing gaze I'd gotten from Bill at the gas station. News traveled fast in a town this size. I felt like a specimen under a microscope. I ordered pancakes and ate quickly, feeling their eyes on me. I found Evelyn Albright's business card in the envelope. E. Albright, attorney at law. The address was just a few blocks away, on the town's main square. Her office was on the second floor of a handsome old brick building, above a hardware store. The stairs creaked under my weight. A simple wooden door had her name painted on it in neat, gold letters. I took a deep breath, straightened my jacket, and knocked. A voice from inside called, "It's open!" I entered a small, sunlit room lined wall to wall with books. It smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and brewed tea. A woman sat behind a large wooden desk, her back to a window that overlooked the town square. She looked to be in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a simple, practical dress and peered at me over a pair of reading glasses. This was not the slick, expensive lawyer Sharon would have. This was something else entirely. "Can I help you?" she asked. Her voice was crisp, no nonsense. "I'm Leo Vance," I said. "Arthur's grandson. He left me your card." Her expression softened, just a fraction. The severity in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of something that looked like sympathy. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," she said, gesturing to a worn leather chair in front of her desk. "Please, sit. Would you like some tea?" "No, thank you, ma'am." I sat down, feeling like a schoolboy in the principal's office. "I was your grandfather's lawyer for 20 years, Leo. And his friend," she said, taking off her glasses and setting them on a stack of papers. "He was a remarkable man. Stubborn as a mule, but remarkable. He told me about the provisions he made for you, the letters, the information. I nodded, unsure of what to say. I have them, the letters. Good, she said. Then you know the basics of the situation. Your grandfather established a trust for the property years ago. He and your father were the trustees. Upon your father's death, his share of the trusteeship passed to you, contingent on your 18th birthday. Your stepmother, Sharon, is the beneficiary of your father's estate, but she is not a trustee of the property. She cannot sell the land. Only the trustees can. And since your grandfather is deceased, that leaves you. You are the sole remaining trustee. The word sank in slowly. Sole remaining trustee. It sounded so formal, so important. Me, the kid who just got kicked out with 2 duffel bags. So, she can't do anything without me? I asked. Precisely, Ms. Albright confirmed. Her lawyer has been sending me letters for months, trying to find a loophole. There isn't one. Arthur made sure of that. His trust was ironclad. Sharon's strategy, it seems, was to put you in a desperate position and force you to liquidate your own inheritance for pennies on the dollar. She wants you to authorize the sale to Horizon, after which she would, as the estate's beneficiary, claim the proceeds. But the proceeds would come to the trust, right? To me? She gave a thin, wry smile. That's where it gets murky. Her lawyers would argue that, since you authorized the sale, the funds belong to the estate she controls. It would be a long, ugly legal battle. A battle she assumes you don't have the resources to fight. She underestimated your grandfather. He left me money, I said quietly, and a file cabinet. I know, Ms. Albright said. He left a copy of all that research with me as well, along with a signed retainer. Leo, my services are already paid for. You have a lawyer. The question is, what do you want me to do? It was the same question I'd asked myself in the dark, but now it felt different. It wasn't just an emotional choice. It was a strategic one. What are my options? I asked. Option 1, she began, ticking a finger in the air. We use Arthur's research as leverage. We go to Horizon and show them that we know about their tactics and the potential transit line. We negotiate a fair market value for the property. It will be a substantial sum, more than you can imagine. You could sell, walk away a very wealthy young man, and never think of Havenwood or your stepmother again. Wealthy, the word sounded foreign. It was the easy path, but with a different prize at the end. Not just survival, but security. Option 2, she continued, her gaze steady. We refuse to sell. We tell them the property is not for sale at any price. They will not be happy. They will likely try to acquire the properties around you and make your life difficult. They could try to have the building condemned for code violations. The leaky roof would be their starting point. It will be a fight. A long, expensive, and stressful fight. You would be David against a very, very large Goliath. She let the 2 options hang in the air. Sell and be rich. Stay and fight. My grandfather, I said, thinking of his letters. He called the shop a shield, but also a key. What did he mean by that? Miss Albright leaned back in her chair, a fond, sad smile on her face. Arthur believed that work wasn't just about earning a living. He believed it was about having a purpose. He didn't just fix things, he helped people. That shop was the heart of this community for a long time. When the big box stores moved in 30 miles away, the small businesses here started to die. Arthur held on. He thought, he hoped, that someone might come along who saw the value in it again. Not as a piece of land, but as a place. A place to build something. A place to build something. The phrase echoed the hope I had felt, that fragile shoot in the darkness. There's a third thing Arthur left with me, she said, her voice softer. She reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a thick manila folder. She slid it across the desk to me. This is beyond legal advice. This was a personal request from him. I opened the folder. Inside were not legal documents, but schematics. Dozens of them. Detailed, hand-drawn blueprints for electronic components. On top was a legally registered patent document from the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. The inventor's name was Arthur Jensen, my grandfather. The patent was for something called a Jensen core audio transducer. Your grandfather wasn't just a repairman, Leo, Ms. Albright said. He was an inventor, a brilliant one. That patent is for a type of audio component, a speaker driver. It's incredibly durable, efficient, and produces a sound that audiophiles would kill for. He perfected it in the 90s, but never had the capital or the desire to mass produce it. He sold a few custom units to high-end audio designers. The patent is still active, and it belongs to you. I stared at the documents, at the intricate drawings and dense technical descriptions. This was the key. It wasn't a metaphor. It was a tangible, real thing. An invention. A legacy of creation, not just of repair. So the shop, I started, my voice trailing off, is the only place with the custom tools required to build them, she finished for me. He left you not just a piece of land, not just a legal fight, but the means to create something of value. That was his third option. Not to sell, not just to fight, but to build. It's the hardest path of all, Leo. It would mean fixing the roof, cleaning up the mess, learning his trade. It would mean dedicating your life to it. He didn't want to force that on you. He just wanted you to know it was possible. I closed the folder. My mind was reeling, but my heart was calm. I looked out the window at the small, sleepy town square. I thought of the dusty workbench, the tools laid out so neatly. I thought of the sign, "If it has a current, we can fix it." It wasn't just about electricity. It was about life, about purpose. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice clear and steady, "tell Horizon the property is not for sale." For the first time, Evelyn Albright didn't just smile. She beamed. "I was hoping you'd say that," she said. "Now, let's talk about getting that roof fixed." Leaving the lawyer's office, I felt taller. The weight on my shoulders hadn't vanished, but it had changed its nature. It was no longer the dead weight of despair. It was the solid, heavy weight of purpose. I walked back toward Church Street, not as a lost kid who'd been cast out, but as the sole remaining trustee of the Arthur Jensen Trust, the owner of a U.S. patent and the proprietor of a business. A very, very dusty business. The reality of my decision hit me as soon as I opened the shop door again. The same overwhelming smell of decay greeted me. The mountains of junk seemed even taller, the dust thicker. My grand declaration in Ms. Albright's clean, orderly office felt a world away from this chaotic mess. Choosing to build was one thing. Knowing where to even start was another. I stood in the middle of the main room, the flashlight beam playing over the electronic debris. It was paralyzing. I could spend a year in here and barely make a dent. My grandfather's voice from the letter echoed in my mind. I look for the flaw, the weak point, the broken connection. That was it. I couldn't fix the whole shop at once. I had to find the first broken connection. And the most obvious one was the mess. I couldn't work. I couldn't think. I couldn't even breathe in this environment. The first step wasn't soldering or studying schematics. It was cleaning. I spent the rest of the day on a reconnaissance mission. I used some of the cash to buy supplies from the hardware store below Ms. Albright's office. Heavy-duty trash bags, work gloves, dust masks, buckets, and a sturdy push broom. The man at the counter, who had a name tag that read George, gave me a nod. "Fixin' up the old place?" he asked. "Trying to," I said. "Good," he grunted. About time someone did. Arthur would be glad. It seemed the whole town was watching me, waiting. It wasn't a hostile feeling. It was expectant, like they were waiting to see if I was worthy of the man they remembered. Back at the shop, I put on the mask and gloves and started. I decided on a simple strategy: clear one workbench at a time. I designated one corner of the shop as a salvage area, one as a junk pile, and one for things I wasn't sure about. It was slow, filthy work. Every object was coated in a thick, greasy layer of dust. I dragged ancient, heavy television sets to the junk corner, their plastic casings cracking under the strain. I swept decades of dirt and fallen plaster into huge piles. As I worked, the shop began to reveal more of its history. I found a box of receipts from the 1970s, the paper thin and yellowed. I found a child's drawing of a robot taped to the inside of a cabinet door, signed with a backwards L for Leo. I didn't even remember drawing it. It was like digging through the geological strata of my own forgotten life. Late in the afternoon, I was clearing the main workbench, the one where my grandfather had been working on the majestic radio. The tools were still laid out, a silent tribute to an interrupted task. I carefully gathered them: wrenches, pliers, screwdrivers with wooden handles worn smooth by his grip, and placed them in a box. Beneath a dusty cloth, I found something I hadn't noticed before: a thick, leather-bound ledger book. I wiped the cover with my glove. There was no title. I opened it. The pages were filled with my grandfather's same neat architectural handwriting. It wasn't a financial ledger. It seemed to be a work journal. Each entry started with a date, a customer's name, and the item they'd brought in. March 12, 1998. Mrs. Gable. Philco Predicta Television. Picture tube is flickering. She says it's the only thing her husband watches. He's unwell. Below the initial entry was a detailed, step-by-step account of the repair, complete with hand-drawn diagrams of the circuitry. But it didn't end there. A final note concluded the entry. March 15, 1998. Replaced the horizontal oscillator tube. Adjusted the flyback transformer. Picture is steady. Mrs. Gable was very happy. She brought me a jar of peach preserves. Her husband sat in his chair and watched the baseball game. He smiled. I turned the page. Another entry. April 2nd, 2001. Mr. Henderson. Grundig Majestic Stereo Console. The turntable won't spin. It was a wedding gift from his late wife. Wants to hear their song one more time. And the follow-up. April 4th, 2001. Idler wheel had turned to stone. Replaced it with a custom-molded part. Cleaned and lubricated the platter bearing. Played a Sinatra record for him in the shop. He cried. I pretended to be busy with something on the bench. I sat on a dusty stool, the ledger open on my knees, and read for an hour. Page after page, it was the same story. He wasn't just fixing electronics. He was fixing pieces of people's lives. He was restoring memories. He was mending connections. This ledger was the heart of the whole operation. It was a record of his purpose. The dry, almost clinical descriptions of the repairs were paired with these short, profoundly gentle observations about the people he was helping. He saw the humanity behind the broken machines. This, I realized, was the real legacy. The patent was the brains, the information was the shield, but this ledger was the soul. This was what Ms. Albright meant. This was the key in its other sense. The shop wasn't just a place to build speakers, it was a place to continue this work. My resolve hardened into something that felt like bedrock. This place was not going to become a parking lot for a transit station. It was not going to be bulldozed for the convenience of the Horizon Consortium. I was going to fight for it, not just for my own future, but for the memory of the man who cried along with his customers and pretended to be busy. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. First, basic habitability. I found the breaker box, a relic from the 1950s, and, after some trial and error, managed to get the lights in the back office working. The single bare bulb that flickered on felt like a major victory. I spent the morning scrubbing the small apartment, battling layers of grime until the sink and cot were usable. It wasn't clean, but it was sanitized. Then, I turned my attention back to the file cabinet. I used the small brass key from under the desk. The drawer slid open with a screech. Inside were dozens of neatly labeled files. Horizon, initial offers. Horizon, intimidation tactics, affidavits. City planning, zoning variances. It was exactly as he'd described, a meticulous, damning archive of corporate malfeasance. I spent the afternoon reading through them, my anger mixing with a profound respect for his diligence. He had been fighting a quiet war for years. A sharp knock on the front door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the front, peering through a clean patch I'd wiped on the window. A man in an expensive-looking suit stood on the sidewalk. He had slicked-back hair and an impatient air about him. He looked profoundly out of place on the quiet, slightly shabby street. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" "Leo Vance?" he asked, his voice smooth and confident. He didn't wait for an answer. "My name is Marcus Thorne. I represent the Horizon Consortium." He tried to peer past me into the dark shop. "I was hoping we could have a chat. My office has been dealing with your stepmother, but now that you're the principal, I thought it best to speak directly." My heart hammered against my ribs. Goliath had arrived. I thought of my grandfather's warning, "Do not talk to anyone from Horizon." I thought of Ms. Albright's calm, steady face. "I have a lawyer," I said, my voice coming out stronger than I expected. "Her name is Evelyn Albright. You can speak with her." Thorne's smile tightened. It didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, a small-town attorney. I'm sure she's very competent. But this is a simple transaction, son. There's no need to complicate it and pay legal fees. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. Life-changing for a young man in your position." He looked pointedly at my dusty clothes. "Talk to my lawyer," I repeated. His smile vanished completely. His eyes turned cold. "Listen, kid. That building is a teardown. It's a liability. We're doing you a favor. Don't be stupid. Don't let some local lawyer who doesn't understand the big picture fill your head with nonsense. There's a number on the table. Take it. It's the best you're going to get." It was the threat, delivered in a silk glove. The intimidation my grandfather had documented. "The property is not for sale," I said, and I closed the door in his face. I leaned against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. My hand was shaking. It was one thing to make a decision in a lawyer's office. It was another to say it to the face of the man who wanted to crush you. A moment later, I heard his footsteps retreat. I stayed there for a long time, the old wood of the door cool against my back. The fight had started, and I had just thrown the first punch. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. My life became a cycle of cleaning, sorting, and learning. I'd wake up early, make coffee on the hot plate, and get to work in the main shop. I filled dozens of trash bags with irreparable junk and debris. I swept floors that hadn't seen a broom in a generation. Slowly, painstakingly, the shop began to emerge from its cocoon of dust. I uncovered more workbenches, more shelves of components, a drill press, a lathe. It was a fully equipped workshop, frozen in time. I spent my evenings in the small office, poring over two things: my grandfather's ledger and the folder of his patent schematics. The ledger taught me about his philosophy, about the soul of the work. The schematics were a language I didn't understand, a dense forest of symbols and numbers, but I was determined to learn. I found his old textbooks on audio engineering and electronics theory. I started at the beginning: Ohm's law, Kirchhoff's circuit laws, the difference between a capacitor and a resistor. It was like learning to read all over again. Ms. Albright called me every few days. "Mr. Thorne is not pleased," she said, a note of dry amusement in her voice. "He sent a letter threatening to report the building for numerous code violations: the leaky roof, faulty wiring, lack of public access. He's trying to get the city to condemn it." "Can he do that?" I asked, a knot of fear tightening in my stomach. "He can try," she said, "but it's a process, and we can fight it. The first step is to show we're making improvements." I spoke to George down at the hardware store. He knows a roofer, a good one, who will do the work for a fair price and let you pay in installments. His name is Frank. Expect a call. Frank called the next day. He was a man of few words. He came by, climbed up a ladder to the roof, came back down 20 minutes later and said, "It's bad, but I've seen worse. I can patch the main leaks for now. Give you some time. Full replacement will have to wait." He and his crew were there the next morning. The sound of their hammers on the roof was the most hopeful sound I'd ever heard. It was the sound of rebuilding. As I cleaned, the town seemed to be slowly waking up to my presence. People would stop by. Bill from the gas station brought me a thermos of hot coffee one morning. "Figured you could use it," was all he said. George from the hardware store dropped off a box of new, high-efficiency light bulbs. "These will save you on the electric bill once you get the wiring checked out," he advised. Mrs. Gable, a tiny, ancient woman who walked with a cane, knocked on my door. "You're Arthur's boy," she said, peering at me with bright, bird-like eyes. "You look like your mother." She pressed a jar of peach preserves into my hands. "Your grandfather fixed my television set once, a long time ago. He was a good man." Each interaction was a small thread, weaving me into the fabric of this place. They weren't just being kind. They were investing in me. They were showing their support in the only ways they knew how. They were choosing a side. My side. One afternoon, I made a discovery that changed everything. I was clearing the last, most cluttered workbench in the back corner. It was buried under a pile of old chassis and burned-out transformers. After clearing the junk, I wiped down the heavy wooden surface. It was scarred and stained from decades of work. As I ran my cloth over it, I noticed that one of the wooden planks seemed to have a slightly wider seam around it than the others. It was almost imperceptible. Curiosity piqued, I examined it closer. There was no handle, no knob. I tried to pry it up with my fingers, but it wouldn't budge. I remembered my grandfather's love for clever mechanisms. I started tapping along the edges of the plank, listening. Near one end, I heard a faint, hollow sound. I pressed down hard on that spot. With a soft click, the plank popped up a fraction of an inch. My breath caught. It was a hidden compartment. I lifted the plank away. Beneath it was a shallow, felt-lined space, about 2 feet long and a foot wide. It was not empty. Inside lay 2 objects. The first was a series of small, exquisitely crafted wooden boxes. I opened one. Nestled in a bed of velvet was a finished Jensen core audio transducer. It was beautiful, a perfect marriage of form and function, metal and wood. It felt heavy, solid. It felt like quality. There were 5 more boxes, each containing a perfect, finished driver. A complete set. The second object was another letter. It was thicker than the others, and the envelope was made of heavy, cream-colored paper. My name was on it, in his familiar script. This one felt different. It felt final. I sat on the floor of the half-cleaned shop, the sounds of the roofers hammering above me, and opened the last letter from my grandfather. "My dearest Leo," it began, and the formality of it made my throat tighten. "If you are reading this, then you have found my last secret. You have cleaned away the dust and decay, and you have looked closely enough to find the hidden places. This makes me prouder than you can know. I have left you with a legal battle, a dilapidated building, and a set of complex schematics. It is a heavy burden to place on your young shoulders, and I have spent many nights asking myself if I am right to do so. But I did not leave you these things to make you a warrior or a businessman. I left them to give you a choice, a real one. The world will tell you that an inheritance is about money. It is about what you are given. I believe an inheritance is about what you choose to build with it. In this compartment, you found a set of finished drivers. They are the only complete, working set in existence. They are my proof of concept. I have also left you my work journals, the real ones. The ones that detail every failure, every breakthrough, every dead end I hit while designing these things over 20 years. The schematics show you the destination, but the journals show you the path. They are the more valuable document. You have 3 paths before you now, and I want you to consider them carefully. Path 1. The path of wealth. Take these finished drivers, along with the patent and the journals, to an established high-end audio company. They will understand their value immediately. They will buy the rights from you for a sum of money that will make the Horizon Consortium's offer look like pocket change. You will be set for life. You will never have to work another day if you do not wish to. There is no shame in this path. It is a path to security. Path 2. The path of the warrior. Use the information I left you. Fight Horizon. Expose them. Maybe you win, maybe you lose. But you fight for the principle of the thing. You fight for this town, for the memory of this place. It is a noble path, but it will consume you. And in the end, what will you have won? A victory, perhaps, but you will be defined by your enemy. Then there's the third path, the hardest one, the one I hope you will choose. Path 3. The path of the craftsman. Forget the big payday. Use the legal fight only as a shield to give you time. Take the money I left you, take the help of the good people in this town who remember what this shop once was, and build. Start small. Learn the trade. Use my journals. Fix the roof. Fix the wiring. Fix Mrs. Gable's radio. Then, when you are ready, learn to build the drivers. Build one. Then build another. Do not build them to get rich. Build them because the work itself has meaning. Create things of quality and purpose in a world that is drowning in cheap, disposable junk. Become a source of excellence in a forgotten corner of the world. This path will not make you wealthy overnight. It may never make you wealthy at all. It offers no grand victory, only the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. It is a life of purpose. It is the life your mother would have wanted for you. It is the life I lived. The choice is yours, Leo, not mine. I have given you the tools. What you build is up to you. Whatever you choose, know that you were loved. Your grandfather, Arthur. I sat there for a long time, the letter in my hand, the heavy, perfect speaker driver resting in my lap. The hammering on the roof had stopped. A sliver of late afternoon sun cut through the grime of a high window, illuminating a billion dancing dust motes. And in that quiet, dusty shop, surrounded by the ghosts of 100 broken things, I cried. I cried for the grandfather I barely knew, but who knew me so completely. I cried for the father I had lost. I cried for the mother I couldn't remember, but whose spirit I now felt all around me. And I cried for the scared, lonely boy who had gotten off the bus 2 weeks ago, who had been given a worthless inheritance and had just discovered it was the most valuable thing in the world. The choice was no longer a choice. It had never been a choice. My grandfather had known which path I would take. He had just wanted me to walk it myself. I wiped my eyes on my dusty sleeve, placed the perfect speaker back in its velvet box, and stood up. There was work to do. The decision settled not like a weight, but like an anchor. It held me steady. The next morning, I called Ms. Albright. "I've made a decision," I told her, my voice clear. About the third path. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear the smile in her voice when she spoke. Arthur would be very pleased. So, what's the first step, Mr. Vance? The first step, I said, looking around the shop, at the newly patched roof where sunlight now streamed in, at the cleared workbenches, at the boxes of my grandfather's tools, is to get the power turned on. Properly. That began a new phase. The battle with Horizon continued in the background, a low hum of legal letters and procedural delays orchestrated by Ms. Albright, but my focus was on the shop. An electrician, a friend of Frank the roofer, came and spent a week patiently tracing the ancient knob and tube wiring, replacing it with a modern, safe system. He left me the bill, a formidable sum, and simply said, "Pay me when you can. Arthur once fixed my son's first electric guitar for free." Said it was an investment in the future. This town, I was learning, had a long memory and a currency that wasn't just cash. It was a currency of favors, of kindness, of shared history. With lights and power, the shop transformed. It was still old, still scarred, but it was alive. I could work past sunset. I could plug in the old oscilloscope and watch its green line flicker to life. I started small, just as the letter advised. I pulled out my grandfather's ledger and found a recent entry, one from just before he'd stopped working. Mr. Henderson, Grundig Majestic, turntable. The same man from the entry years ago. His record player was broken again. I found Mr. Henderson's number in the old phone book. I called him, my heart pounding. An elderly man with a frail voice answered. Mr. Henderson? My name is Leo Vance. I'm Arthur Jensen's grandson. I've reopened the shop. I saw in his notes that your record player was having trouble. I'd like to try and fix it for you. No charge. There was a long silence. Arthur's boy, he finally whispered. I'll be damned. The turntable hasn't spun in 5 years. Bring it by, son. Just bring it by. The next day, a dusty, beautiful wooden stereo console arrived on a dolly, pushed by Mr. Henderson and his neighbor. I spent a week on it. I used my grandfather's journals, his schematics, his tools. I traced the problem to a tiny, perished rubber belt, a part that hadn't been manufactured in 40 years. I remembered the entry in the ledger. Custom-molded part. I found my grandfather's small lathe and a box of raw materials. I spent 2 days failing, creating clumsy, useless rings of rubber. On the third day, I made one that was perfect. I installed it. I cleaned the contacts, lubricated the mechanisms, and placed a record on the platter. I held my breath and flipped the switch. There was a soft click, and then, with a gentle hum, the turntable began to spin. The needle dropped, and the warm, scratchy sound of a Sinatra song filled the shop. When Mr. Henderson came to pick it up, I played it for him. He stood there, his hand resting on the polished wood, and tears streamed down his wrinkled face. He didn't say a word. He just listened. And I pretended to be busy with something on the bench. That was the first repair. It was the start. Word spread, slowly at first, then like a flood. People started showing up with their broken treasures. An old woman with a clock that hadn't chimed since her husband passed away. A young musician with a vintage amplifier that hummed and buzzed. A family with an old movie projector they wanted to use to watch films of their parents' wedding. My life became a rhythm of diagnosis and repair, of studying and learning. I was not my grandfather. I was slow, clumsy. I made mistakes. I had to consult his journals for everything. But with each small victory, with each restored piece of personal history I returned to its owner, I felt a piece of myself being restored too. I wasn't just fixing their things, I was fixing me. I sent Sharon's lawyer a single, formal letter, drafted by Ms. Albright, stating that I, as sole trustee, would not be selling the property. I received no reply. The silence was more eloquent than any words. I had taken myself off her board. I was no longer a pawn in her game. The fight with Horizon wasn't over, but it had changed. With every repair I completed, with every person who left my shop with a restored piece of their past, my roots in this community grew deeper. Horizon wasn't just fighting me anymore, they were fighting the town. They were fighting Mr. Henderson's Sinatra record and Mrs. Gable's peach preserves, and the memory of a good man who fixed things. 6 months after I arrived in Havenwood, I stood in the shop. It was clean now, organized. The workbenches were orderly, the tools hung on pegboards. Light streamed through the clean front window. A "Now Open" sign, hand-painted by George's daughter, hung in the door. The shop was breathing again. I hadn't started building the Jensen core drivers yet. I wasn't ready, but I would be. For now, I was a repairman. I was learning the trade from the ground up, just as he had. I was earning my inheritance, not just accepting it. That evening, I sat at my grandfather's desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. I began to write. It wasn't a ledger, not like his. It was a letter. "Dear grandfather," I wrote. "Thank you. I chose the third path. The work is hard, but it is good. The roof is fixed. The lights are on. And today, I made a clock chime for the first time in 20 years. I think you would have liked the sound." I folded the letter and placed it in the empty compartment under the workbench. It was the first entry in my own journal. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning. I hadn't just inherited a worthless repair shop. I had inherited a home. I had inherited a purpose. I had inherited a future I could build with my own 2 hands. And that's the real lesson, isn't it? Sometimes the things that look the most broken are the things that give us the tools to fix ourselves. Sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't something you're given, but something you have to earn. It's the chance to build a life of purpose, one small repair at a time. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and the power of building something meaningful, please consider subscribing to the channel. And I really want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me about an unexpected inheritance in your own life, not about money, but about a lesson, a responsibility, or a chance to become someone new. Your stories are what make this community what it is. Thank you for listening.